Hello everyone, what's going on? I'm Gav, the Master974 back again today, and welcome to another iteration of episode 0 of the Valve source code tutorial series. I think this is like the 5th version of this tutorial now. But what I'm going to be doing is outlining how you can use Docker to compile the Source 2013 code, specifically the Source 2013 single player code, but this can also apply to the pre-Team Fortress 2 32-bit version of the Source 2013 multiplayer code. Now I'm doing this because I mentioned this method in the Gamepad UI follow-up tutorial, and I thought it would be a good idea to make this its own video rather than sticking this in the Gamepad UI follow-up tutorial. And I mentioned that I wanted to do it in early 2026, meaning like January, and now we're coming up to May, so I'm sorry for delaying the production of this video for as long as I have. But without further ado, let's just get into what you need to do. So first off, you want to download and install Steam. Now there's many different ways you can do this. For example, you can download the installer from Steam's website, you can use the software browser, or you can do a terminal command such as sudo apt-get install Steam if you're on Debian-based Linux, or sudo pacman-S Steam if you're on Arch-based Linux. Steam Deck users, you should already have Steam installed by default, so you don't have to worry about this. Anyway, when you have Steam installed and you've logged into your account and it's updated and everything, you want to go to your library and you want to enable the tools filter. And then you want to go into the newly created tools section and you want to find Source SDK based 2013 single player and download it. I'm going to be primarily focusing on Source 2013 single player for this video, but if you're doing anything with the old Source 2013 multiplayer code, then you would download Source SDK based 2013 multiplayer instead. Now, for Source 2013 single player, there's actually an extra step that you need to follow, which is that you need to right click, go to properties, and then in the game versions and betas tab, you want to select the upcoming beta. Anyway, the next thing you need to do is get the Source 2013 single player code. Now, there is a couple of different ways you can do this. So for example, you can go to Valve's GitHub page, select the single player branch and download and extract the zip of the archive. Alternatively, you can use community repos, for example my source code tutorials GitHub page. However, probably the simplest way is to use a terminal command called git specifically, which does the job of downloading and extracting the code without even you requiring a web browser to do so. So what you need to do to get git is sudo apt-get install git if you're on Debian-based Linux, or sudo pacman-S git if you're on Arch-based Linux. Now one thing to note is if you're on the Steam Deck, you have to do sudo steamos-read-only disable first to disable the read-only file system, otherwise pacman commands won't work. And if you haven't set up a password yet, then sudo won't work. So you need to type in passwd and type in a password to set a password, which will be the super user password, and then you can disable the read-only file system. Now even if you have issues, especially on Arch-based Linux, like what you'll probably see in the video here, then I would recommend you do these commands. So you want to do sudo pacman-key --init, sudo pacman-key --populate arch linux, and sudo pacman-key --populate hollow. And then you can try the sudo pacman-S git command again and it should work. But with git installed, you should be able to do git clone https://github.com/valve-software/source-sdk-2013 single player single branch, and you can also specify an optional folder name if you want to. If you do specify the optional folder name, then the code will be placed in the folder called whatever you decide to call it. But by default, the code will go into a folder called source-sdk-2013. Now, as a little aside at this point, if you are dealing with the old pre-Team Fortress 2 32-bit version of the Source 2013 multiplayer code, then you need to go into the src devtools folder, so that would be mp src devtools, and you need to open up makefile-base-posix.mac, and between lines 83 and 112, you want to find the Steam runtime path in the else statement, not the else if ec statement. And then you want to change the path from /valve/steam-runtime to just /user/usr specifically. Now you don't need to do this if you're dealing with the single player code because this file is drastically different for some reason. But anyway, once the code has been downloaded, and if you're dealing with the Source 2013 single player code, you just want to navigate to SPSRC or just the SRC folder. You want to open up a terminal and do /create game projects and or /create all projects, which will create a games.mac and everything.mac file respectively. Now, one thing to note is that if you have problems, specifically with VPC not executing correctly, then you need to make sure that VPC and the related scripts are set to be run as programs. So these would be in the src devtools bin folder, and you want to make sure that VPC Linux, vpc.sh, and Linux Ccache are all allowed to be executed as programs by going into the properties. Now, I'm not sure what I did to resolve the issue even when I checked to make sure that VPC Linux, vpc.sh and Linux Ccache were executed as programs as they were supposed to, but I believe what worked for me was to download the following packages via the terminal as if you were using the old chroot method. So on Debian based Linux you want to do sudo apt-get install build-essential gcc-multilib and g++-multilib. And if you're on Arch based Linux, you want to do sudo pacman-S base-devil gcc dpkg multilib-devil, as you'll see in the video. Anyway, once you have the games and everything Mac files created, you need to get Docker. Now the thing is, on Debian based Linux, this process is actually rather complex because Docker isn't included with the apt repository. So you can't do something like sudo apt-get install docker because it won't work. So to be able to get Docker, you need to do these commands in this order. And I'm not going to go into all of the capitalization of letters and stuff, but you'll see exactly what to do in the video. So you want to start by doing sudo apt update to update your system. It might take a little bit of time. Then you want to do sudo apt install ca-certificates curl. And again, this might take a little bit of time as well, so wait for that to finish. Then do sudo install -m 0755-d /etc/apt/keyrings. Then sudo curl -fs S https://downloads.docker.com /linux/ubuntu/gpg-o /etc/apt/keyrings/docker.asc, and then sudo chmod a+r of etc/apt-keyrings-docker.asc, as you'll see in the video. Then you want to do sudo t, that's TEE, etc/apt-sources.list.d docker.sources, but end with 2 less than signs and then in all capitals EOF. And if this is correct, when you press enter, the next line will begin with a single greater than sign. Now, this means you're going to be executing a bunch of code at once until you type in EOF in all capitals again. Now, in this section, as I said, I'm not going to go into the capitalization of stuff, so you just have to copy and paste what I show in the video exactly as I show it and say it. So you want types, deb, URIs, https://downloads.docker.com /linux/ubuntu. Suites is $ and then in brackets dot space /etc/os-release, && echo and then in speech marks $ and in curly brackets Ubuntu _codename : $version _codename. Make sure you get the brackets in the right place and all that. Then components stable, architectures $ and then in brackets dpkg --print -architecture. Then signed -by etc/apt-keyrings-docker.asc, and then end with EOF in all capitals and then press enter. And that should add Docker to the apt repository, so then do sudo apt update and it should add Docker into that list of links that it checks for. And if you see that, then you've done it correctly. So what you want to do to get Docker is to do sudo apt install docker-ce, docker-ce-cli, containerd.io, docker-buildx-plugin, and docker-compose-plugin. Then, select yes and wait for that to install. If you're on Arch-based Linux, the process is actually way easier because you can just open up the terminal or the console or the command line interface, whatever you want to call it, and just do sudo pacman-S docker-compose to download and install the necessary Docker packages. At this point, regardless of if you're on Debian-based or Arch-based Linux, the paths should converge at this point. Now, you want to do sudo systemctl status docker to see if Docker is running. If it's not, then you may want to do sudo systemctl start docker and or sudo systemctl enable docker. And if you do that, then do sudo systemctl enable docker.service to make sure Docker begins, and if you want to, Docker starts when the system boots up. And you may need to restart your system, especially when you use Docker, you get error messages such as cannot connect to the Docker daemon. So to be on the safe side, give your operating system a quick restart, and to make sure your Docker instance is working correctly, you want to go to the terminal or the console or the command line interface and do sudo docker run hello-world, and it should perform a small download and display a message in the terminal or console saying something to the effects of hello from Docker and a bunch of other text. If you see this, then you can continue because that means Docker has installed successfully. So you want to navigate to your source code's src folder, which is where the games.mac and or everything.mac files are located, as I outlined in a previous step. And you want to open up a console or terminal in this directory, and you want to do this command. So you want to do sudo docker run -v, the path to the src folder, then a colon, then the same path to the src folder, --rm -it registry.gitlab.steamos.cloud /steamrt/scout/sdk /i386, then bash, and then enter. So to explain what this is doing, sudo docker run just means use Docker to run a specified container, but -v creates a bridge between the Docker container and the file system. That way the container can access the code that's going to be compiled, and that's why you need to do the path to the src folder, then separated by a colon, and then the path to the src folder again. If that path has a space in it, you have to surround the path in speech marks, so just keep that in mind. The --rm flag means that the container will be deleted upon exit, but please note it won't actually re-download the Steam runtime, because that's what it's going to be doing when you press enter on this command. And the -it and bash parts are needed so a bash session gets started inside of the container so you can use the terminal to continue. And of course the GitLab link is the Docker image that's being used. So as I just said, when you first do this command, it will download the Steam runtime, which is about a 700 megabyte download, so be prepared to wait for a little bit of time while this downloads. Now you'll know if you've been successful with this because you'll see in the terminal something to the effects of steamrt scout 1.0. blah 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 root at blah 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 instead of the usual name at name kind of thing. This means you're connected to the Docker container and can continue. However, you still do need to do cd to change directory, and then the path to the src folder, that way you actually go to the source code folder, and then to begin compiling the code, you just need to do the command make -f games.mac or make -f everything.mac, and the code will begin to compile. Now, this will build the release version of the code. If you want to compile the debug version, then you need to add in all caps cfg equals, and then in all lowercase letters debug. That has to be done before the -f flag. Now, one thing to note is that this is going to take a little bit of time, but it should compile without any errors because I'm focusing mainly on the Source 2013 single player code provided by Valve, and that will compile without any issues. But one thing that I've noticed with this method is that the compiled .so files, equivalent to the .dll files for Windows mods, they don't get copied over to the game folder. For example, you don't get client.so or server.so in the mod hl2 or mod episodic bin folder upon successful compilation of the code. So what you need to do is go through the src folder to find the .so files, and for example in the src game client folder, you should see a folder called obj client hl2 or obj client episodic linux 32, and then you need to go into that folder, into the release folder, and in there you should find a client.so file. You need to copy that over into your mods bin folder basically. And similarly for the server, that will be inside of the src game server, obj server hl2 or obj server episodic Linux 32. Go into that folder, go into the release folder, and then find server.so, copy paste that over into your mods bin folder. Now for the Gamepad UI, because the reason why I'm doing this video is because of the Gamepad UI and trying to get it to work on Linux, that would be located in the src game Gamepad UI folder inside of obj Gamepad UI hl2 Linux 32 or obj Gamepad UI episodic Linux 32. Again, go into the release folder in that folder, and then there should be the Gamepad UI.so file in there. And again, you just need to copy paste that into your mods bin folder. Now to test your mod, the best way that I found is to just copy the mod hl2 or mod episodic or mod hl2 mp folder if you're dealing with the multiplayer code into your source mods folder, and at the very least copy paste replace the client and server.so files in your mods bin folder. Now if you don't know where the source mods folder is on Linux, I'm pretty sure regardless of which distro of Linux you're using, it should be /home/.steam, then Steam apps source mods. And with that mod folder being inside of the source mods folder, you need to restart Steam. And when you launch back into Steam, you should see that the mod is present in the library and you can launch into it. That is kind of where I would end the video, but unfortunately there is actually a small problem with Source 2013 Singleplayer on Linux at the moment, which is where that it crashes as soon as you try to launch into it. It doesn't matter if you launch into the main application or a source mod, as soon as the application launches, it crashes immediately. The thing is, there is a fix for this, and also thankfully I've already done a video about it, so I'll leave you to check that video out now, so you can launch into your Source 2013 Singleplayer mods on Linux successfully without any issues. So yeah everyone, if you wanted to know how to set up the Docker method, that's how you do it. Now there's probably going to be some issues, especially with SDL stuff. So if you have any issues trying to compile the Gamepad UI code and the issues are related to SDL, as I've put down on my GitHub page, if you're on Debian-based Linux, you want to do sudo apt-get install libsdl2-dev to make sure you get the correct SDL header files and stuff. And on Arch-based Linux, you want to do sudo pacman-S SDL2, which does a pretty similar thing. Now, if you are dealing with the chroot method with the Gamepad UI code, you'll get a bunch of warnings that look like errors, but it's okay. Don't worry about it. The code will compile without any errors. Or at least the only errors you should have are related to SDL headers. But I'm not really going to delve into that in this video because, don't really need to. But hopefully you found this somewhat helpful and somewhat informative. And if you have any problems, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below and I'll help you out however I can. But that's all I really need to say, so let me know what you think, take care out there, peace out, see you later. And hopefully this helps you make your source mods on Linux. And thanks for watching everyone.